Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to the Legends podcast with Sarah Faruya at Sarah Faruya Coaching. There are many, many ways to lead a life, and everybody has stories, and I want to hear them and tell them so we can all create or design a work style and a lifestyle that we can be proud of. And today I'm welcoming a lovely, lovely guest, the amazing Jessica Korteman. She's based in Melbourne. At the moment, it's mid-November, probably month 9 of the COVID outbreak of 2020. So we've just been talking about that. It's a beautiful day here in Japan. I live by the seaside, Zushi in Japan, near Kamakura. And Jess is based in Melbourne at the moment, but she has a fascinating story about all of her travels and her life and her family stories, and I'm really looking forward to digging into those. So good morning, Jess.
Good morning, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So a little bit about Jessica before we move on with our first question. So Jessica is an Australian writer, formerly based in Tokyo, Japan, and now she's residing in Melbourne. She's traveled more than 50 countries, about half of them solo, and circumnavigated the globe 3 times, once by plane, once by ship, and the other mostly overland. In 2009, she moved to Tokyo with her husband and started her blog, Notes of Nomads. In 2011, to document what was happening on the ground in Japan after the Tohoku earthquakes, tsunami, and nuclear disaster. The blog then blossomed into tales from all her travels and won Best Writing of a Weblog in the 14th Annual Bloggies Awards in 2014. Oh, it's epic. I didn't realize that. Or I did, and I'd dragged and dropped it somewhere. Her work has been featured on Lonely Planet, NHK, that's the Japanese equivalent of BBC, Intrepid Travel, Singapore Airlines In Flight magazine, Silver Chris, and various other print and online media. Nowadays, she's passionate about pushing the envelope on women in travel and redefining what it means to be a solo female traveler in her latest blogging adventure, Travel Solo Anyway, where she discusses traveling solo, maintaining independence as a married woman, and now as a new mum, although there hasn't been a great deal of traveling this year, sadly. So we're all
Very
innovating.
true.
We were just talking before we got on the call there about how we're innovating our businesses, or how she's specifically innovating her business to allow for the what would you call it, the aftermath of COVID and being kind of grounded, if you like. All of her links to her blogs and her YouTubes, etc., will be linked in the show notes. I think Jessica's absolutely fantastic. I've known her for a few years. She attended one of my workshops, and then we became kind of conspirators, if you like. And I will be hiring her in the future for various things that she's not publicizing them, so I'll keep that on the down low for now. So let's get into it. I'm so excited about today because we've also done some other stuff together, haven't we? We've been through a course together, and you can mention that later if you want to, and we've been through kind of some transformational thinking processes together, and which we're still kind of working through, as well as being the member of a very special circle of people who coach together. So Jess, I'm gonna get stuck in now with you. Could you please introduce yourself to us, tell us about your background, your ancestry, childhood, and just take it wherever you want to.
Yeah, sure. Well, hello everyone. As Sarah said, I'm Jessica Korteman. I'm a travel writer, and my story really begins about 150 kilometers from where I am now. I'm currently in Melbourne, as Sarah said, but I grew up in countryside Victoria in a place called Bendigo. And I lived there until I was 18. So, during my formative years and, during my childhood, I was living in, at the time, it still is quite a rural area. I was living a bit outside of Bendigo. So, we had always had a lot of space. We had a lot of animals. I even had my own sheep. So we had a lot of, I grew up with a lot of space, a lot of time outdoors. building cubby houses and just, putting on the gumboots in the morning and walking out and, playing with all the animals and things like that. So, that sort of, I guess, country life was something that was a big part of my upbringing. And, just hanging out with the neighborhood kids. And we were, of this sort of the generation where, you just wander down the street and you knew that somebody was looking after you. My mum knew that someone was looking after us. One of the neighborhood, we'd be at one of the neighborhood houses. So yeah, basically, I grew up in sort of a countryside location, and then, for high school, went into town where there was only one school bus that could take us there. We didn't have any public transportation, certainly not at the time. So, taking the school bus into town and basically completed, in my town, there was actually, it's an interesting situation. They have, basically we have a system where we have basically 4 years at public school, public high school, and then everyone kind of feeds into one senior secondary college, which is 2 years. And at the senior secondary college, I really, really enjoyed my time there because it was very, very much like university life. And, we called our teachers by their first names. We had no uniform. We could come and go off campus, come and go as we pleased. What we did with our time was up to us. If we didn't show up to class, that was on us, so it was very much, I think, a good stepping stone for what university life is. Because I did find that, when I did go on to university, there were a lot of people around me who kind of struggled with that huge transition going from, a high school situation where you're coddled a little bit to being absolutely free to do whatever you want. And some people struggled with not having somebody there to guide them as much as they did during high school. So I think having those last 2 years in that kind of scenario was very, very helpful to me. And, during those last couple of years, I did have a very strong sense about what I wanted to do going forward in terms of, I knew the area, like I've always been drawn to the humanities and the arts.
Mm-hmm.
The math and science areas were definitely, I did the minimum you had to do to finish your high school certificate. And I knew that was definitely not the path I wanted to take. Exactly where I wanted to go, I wasn't sure, but I knew 100% it was going to be something to do with the humanities area, maybe international development. I was very into politics, political science. So I was really, anything that involved like reading, writing, researching, I knew that was the sort of area that I wanted to go into.
It's interesting. Me too. I mean, sciences and arts were like my like least favorite, least talented things, and yet I didn't study them because I falsely thought I wanted to be a doctor. So my 16 to 18-year-old studies were maths, chemistry, biology, and then like in some kind of then general studies, and in some kind of attempt to claw back something from the other side, I did try to do French A level as well alongside. It was a disaster. But I mean, I'll be honest, I'm quite glad I've got that kind of scientific rooting now, because it really helps to inform the way that I work now. As I like to touch in kind of some otherworldly areas, but but it's always grounded in some kind of scientific background. So I'm grateful for it now. But oh my God, I hear you so much, and I just always wish that I'd done something differently. And I think it's a great realization to have there. But good on you, humanities. I have a question for you.
Yes.
How many children were in your family, and where are you in the order?
Yeah, so there are 3 kids. I'm the oldest. And so next is my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, and then my sister, who's 5 years younger than me.
Okay. How do you think that's influenced you?
I'm an
I eldest girl too.
Yeah. I mean, I think I always, I felt, and, some of this is self-imposed. I felt a strong sense of being, responsible, or being, like sort of a perfectionist, and, and, you know, wanting to make my parents proud. And I sometimes felt like my siblings got away with stuff, you know, like I had to push so hard for my parents to let me do stuff, you know, being the first child. Like I really wanted to, you know, like get this done, get my ears pierced, or, you know, whatever. Yeah. And I had to like fight. But then it's like, oh, your sister can get it done at the same time, or like, you know, like that kind of thing. And so I definitely felt that like as a first child, you're kind of like, I guess, you're kind of, you're working this out with your parents, right? Because it's their experience. Yeah. They're kind of seeing how it goes, right? And so, yeah, of course, things were things change as you have subsequent children, right? And your views change, or, you know, now that you've got an older sibling, okay, you can go do those things because you have someone to look out for you, kind of thing. So it's kind of like working those things out together with your parents, and kind of you're the one who has to kind of push the envelope at first to see where it goes. Yeah.
And now you're an adult. Do you realize that you're like, oh, they didn't know what they were doing. They were just trying to work it out? Because that's what I'm like now. I can see like that they were just, what's going on? They were so young when they had me as well. And you know, my brother was able to, I wouldn't say he was able to get away with more. It was just that they knew what they were doing, and he was also a boy. And, you know, and he was able to watch us and learn how to do them too. So, you know, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
I think maybe they became slightly more relaxed, right? As you've done things more and more, it's like, found their groove in parenting. Yeah.
And parenting wasn't even a word back then, was it?
No.
It's just getting Oh, brilliant. So that responsible perfectionist came through from that. So you went on to university where you'd got this advantage of having already had this kind of transition time during your time living in the countryside. Animals, farms, like what do you think the influence of all that was? Because my understanding is that when you live on a farm, life and death and cycles are very close to you all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it influenced me in many ways. I think, I mean, I was used to like, you know, getting my hands dirty, you know, like, I wasn't afraid to kind of dig into things. I'm not afraid of things like insects or, you know, all of this kind of stuff. And, you know, when you are on a farm, like, I mean, the amount of animals that passed when I was a child, you know, like, it's something that you become used to. Like I had you know, go outside and go to feed my rabbits and discover that, oh, one of them has died, and then having to, you know, bury it and, you know, like deal with that. And I do have one very strong recollection when I was quite young of, we had a whole flock of sheep at that time. And I remember they became fly blown. So they all had to be put down. And I just remember sitting in the house while one of our neighbors came out and like just the shots from the rifle, just shooting the whole flock. And I still remember it to this day. But it wasn't something that I don't remember crying about it or anything like that. It was just like, oh, well, this has happened. This is what we have to do. This is the most humane way to deal with it. And yeah, you do become sort of, you understand that there's a cycle of life and death, and that, you know, not everything is forever. And I think that, that's something that has also stayed with me too, and also has made me want, I think, to really take advantage of opportunities in my life as well, because I know that nothing is forever, or there are opportunities that, you know, are coming up that, you know, I feel that I should follow them while I can.
That's so funny. I just had this awful flash in my head there of the Silence of the Lambs. I'm sure you've thought of this before.
Yeah.
Harriet and the lambs, and they're screaming.
Oh God.
Oh God, it's not even 8:30 and we've got into
we've already gone down that road.
Yeah, but all these things then that just makes me, in the bigger picture, realize that the things that we see in movies and stuff aren't born out of nowhere. And you're not telling me you have some kind of deep trauma there, although, like, you know, Hannibal likes to use that as some kind of psychological leverage to kind of get into her head and stuff like that, which is also funny, isn't it? But like, yeah, it's just, I'm constantly thinking, making patterns and joining the dots between like what happens here and what happens here. It's very funny. Oh, what an interesting childhood. And, you know, I was talking to a friend yesterday, actually, and I at pains of not trying to sound like my day kind of thing. But we were talking, she's a bit younger than me, but maybe 8 years younger than me. And we were both raised in the UK, she in Scotland and me in England. And we're just saying how lucky we were when we were young, because, you know, we'd be put out in the morning during the school holidays and told to come back for lunch. And then we'd have a couple of sandwiches and some soup, and then we'd be put out again until dinner time. And we had like, you weren't allowed to go beyond X road or Y road. And there were certain places you weren't allowed, don't go in that park or this park. But it wasn't like, and we had a big park over the road to us. There was like it was rugby pitches, and there was a rugby hut there. We called it the hut. And they'd say, don't go by the hut because there's bad men there hanging around behind the hut. It wasn't, you can't go out because there's bad men out there. It's like, you can go out, but just stay away from where the you know, the pervs are. And and I'm grateful for that, because it was just, I don't know, you just learn a lot. It widens your horizons, and it sounds like you had something similar as well. And it was just like a little group of kids. It wasn't that we were with an adult who was taking us round there. We were on our own playing out, you know. We'd go around to each other's houses and ring the bell and call, you know, can Carol come out to play? Yeah. And then you go out, and then you go to somebody else's house, and then you'd all be out in the fields doing whatever. I think it's, I don't know, I think it's a shame these days.
Yeah,
These days.
yeah, it's definitely something that I've grown to value a lot. You know, like when I was younger, especially in my teenage years, you know, obviously, you know, I was thinking about, you know, my future and where I wanted to go. And I was like already feeling like I wanted to travel the world, and like, how can I get out of this place, right? But now I've really come to value the fact that I grew up in that kind of area, and that I did have that childhood, that carefree, wild childhood where I just went off wherever and just could use my imagination, you know, just use whatever was around. There was always bits of scrap wood or whatever, and just like making stuff, and just really not worrying about like any of the things that are things that we have to think about these days. Like we didn't have to think about social media or mobile phones or, you know, any of that kind of stuff. So just really being free from any of that stuff, not having any of that media influence in a way. And just, I mean, apart from, you know, TV and things like that, but we really did spend a lot of time outside, a lot of time using our imagination, and we were allowed to get bored, you know. There was like, you know, and which I think a lot of kids don't necessarily have the opportunity to now, now that they have access to their own screens and things like that. So, you know, just allowing ourselves to be bored allowed us to be very creative, you know, and we made our own fun. And I think that also helped, you know, helped my creative process and my creative mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, same. So if we weren't outside, if it was a rainy day, we were in our rooms.
Yes. Yeah.
So
right.
I think my dad made a massive blackboard along one wall, and we would draw whole towns and cities on it and stuff, you know, just, that. And you've mentioned the word imagination a few times. So where do you think that itch to travel came from? Yeah,
because I've felt it from a very young age. You know, I was always fascinated by, you know, any programs on TV that were showing other parts of the world. I remember Sunday night, there was always some kind of documentary on TV. So like Sunday night, we'd always sit around and watch like some, you know, David Attenborough documentary, or, you know, some, you know, historical, cultural like program or something like that. And I just felt this need to go. And I'm not sure exactly where it started from, but I do have this fascination with other places and other people and cultures. And, you know, maybe it came from the fact that I read a lot as a child, and my imagination went to so many different places, and I wanted to experience some of that for myself. And yeah, so maybe through like the world of books and just being in a place where I didn't know much outside of it actually made me think a lot about what else is out there. Because we didn't really have that much else to go on. There weren't that many distractions, to be honest, when I was that young. Like this is before internet and, and before smartphones and things. So, we didn't, basically I was learning about things through books and, some of these programs I was seeing on TV, and it just fascinated me so much. And so I just have this innate desire to, which came from reading, I think. And I remember just going through Encyclopedia Britannicas that my dad picked up a whole set, from a garage sale or something, and just like going through them and just thinking, wow, there's this whole wide world out there, and how fascinating,
Yeah.
And so just somewhere in there, I felt this pull to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I like to kind of try and follow the breadcrumbs back and try and find where those little indicators are that kind of thing is interesting to people. When I was young, my mum went to college, and she, so she had a little group of 10 college friends or 15 college friends. They still to this day meet up. Not this year, obviously, and they go off to a hotel together and have their girls' weekend. They're in the same. And I can remember, like, she'd tell me who's who, so there was like so-and-so who married a lord and lives in a castle, for example, and I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. We went round to a friend's house and she had a swimming pool, and I was like, oh, this is nice, isn't it? And my mum was like, oh, I think I married the wrong man. And I was like, oh, really? Because I was thinking I would get a house like this and pay for it myself, so there's that kind of, already I've got this kind of like, oh, no, I think I was 11 or 12 or something. I looked about 30. And then, and then she'd be like, oh, and then, your godmother, Auntie Mashi, she's been all over the world doing marathons, and she won a video because she won a marathon, a video recorder. This was like, what? In Japan, seed sown. And, and I was like, oh, like that made me lean in, and then there was like somebody else, her friend Kate lived in Hong Kong. Oh, and then there was somebody else like who like, she was like, oh, and she's the one who really always wears really interesting clothes. She doesn't dress like the rest of us. And I was like, who's that? So all these little breadcrumbs are behind you, leading you to where you are today. And those things came out of nowhere. Those things came out of my, did you use the word innate, intuition, from something innate, from your instincts, being like, oh, this is interesting. Interesting, eh?
Yeah. Definitely.
I'm mixing Japanese there. Ne means isn't it in Japanese.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on then. So what did you study at university? And how did that move you forward?
Yeah. So I decided on international studies. And, it was in the humanities area that I was interested in. And I specifically chose the international studies course at RMIT in Melbourne because there was a international internship as part of the program. And so I knew that there were chances for me to study abroad or to do some research abroad, and that really spoke to me. And also the course had a language component that was mandatory. And so these were all things that I wanted to do. And so specifically, I chose this program over programs at other universities at the time because I felt like there was such a practical element to it, and I would be able to finally step out and go see the world, basically, and have that part of my education during university years. So I was able to do that. I did study also at Melbourne University. I did part of my degree there. Fortunately, because the universities had an agreement with each other, because I had to do a language. I had no choice in my course. And I wanted to do Indonesian because I had studied it since I was about 9 or 10 years old. And, at that point, I'd done it all through my high school years, and it was the obvious choice to continue on with it at university. And Melbourne University has a brilliant Indonesian language program, or with native Indonesian speakers, professors. And I was able to get into that program and then have what I did there credited to my degree at RMIT. So that was wonderful. And so yeah, essentially I did those 3 years. It was still, I mean, as much as it was a little bit easier for me, I think, because I had that experience in high school where we had this very easygoing education system, and where we sort of, you know, had to look after ourselves essentially. It was still difficult because I did move from my country hometown to Melbourne, and I came here not really, you know, like basically moving out of home, moving into a place in the city by myself. I didn't really know anyone, although I do have some relatives scattered around, but I was moving to a place where I didn't know anyone. And, you know, I had to find a job. I didn't have a job when I moved, and I basically didn't know how I was going to work it out. I essentially went there and arrived. And I remember the first night, like when my mom and my sister dropped me off there, and then they drove off, and I just thought, okay, wow. Like, you know, you've been thinking about this for such a long time. You know, it's going to happen. I knew I was going to move to Melbourne for my university degree, but when it actually happened and I was sitting there that first night in the apartment, just thinking, what do I do now? You know, like what am I going to do now? And so basically, you know, I sort of, that first night was, I felt strange. Like it felt very strange to be alone. But then, you know, I got to work and I was like, okay, need to go find a job. So I had over the summer been working at a department store in my hometown for a couple of months to save up a bit of money for the move. And so I just decided to go into, they have the same department store in the city, and much bigger than the one I was used to. But I thought, you know, what the heck, I'll just walk in and see, I walk into HR. And so I just walked into HR, and I bumped into someone on the way in, and he said, can I help you? And I said, oh, well, actually, I'm, you know, interested in finding, I'm getting a job here, and, you know, finding out about the process of hiring. And he said, okay, well, I might have a job for you. And so he just walked me down. It turns out he was a manager at the department store. And it turns out that he actually knew, sorry?
What's HR?
HR, like human resources.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, the HR at the
yes, yeah. So I basically went into the back offices, like knocked on, you know, that door and went in and said, you know, I'd like to find out about, you know, any positions here. And it turns out that this person actually knew my manager from the country hometown, and just gave him a call on the spot and said, hey, I've got Jessica here. And then there was silence for a couple of minutes while he did like his reference or whatever. And he got off the phone. He's like, okay, if you want a job, you're hired.
Get out.
So basically, yeah, the following week I was already like working, you know, on the floor. It was not an area that I thought I'd be working in, because, you know, when I was working in the country hometown, I was working in like the shoe department, ladies' shoes department. And I was thinking, okay, they're going to put me in ladies' shoes or clothing or something, I don't know. But it turned out that this position would be in the electronics department. And it's not something that I really know much about. But I was working, you know, the registers and things, so it was fine. And, you know, I'd already had that experience using them in Bendigo. So it was, you know, not such a huge transition for me. But, you know, obviously my world expanded a lot, because I was suddenly had, you know, all these like co-workers, and, you know, I started expanding my friendship group. And also, you know, I was now in a place where I had a very diverse range of people around me. You know, in my country hometown, very Caucasian, and didn't have so many opportunities to really learn about other peoples and cultures. And, you know, when I moved to Melbourne, and particularly in my department, there were people from all over the world. So again, there was something there that was very interesting to me as well, where I expanded my horizons so much just by being in that environment with different people from different backgrounds. And interestingly enough, this is where I met my now husband. So things kind of all weirdly came together in this way. So he was working in the video games department there, and I was working on the registers right next to him. So basically all of those sales, like I would be used to doing the register work for that. And yeah, so we were working together for a couple of years before we started dating. And yeah, that was sort of like the beginning of our relationship. And I was quite young at the time. I was like 20, going on about 21 at the time when we first started dating. And yeah, so it was interesting how the job came together, and subsequently, I didn't know at the time, but
yeah,
that I was meeting people who would influence the rest of my life.
amazing. Wow, what an interesting story. I love this so much. I love hearing all these like origin stories. This is the first time I'm hearing this one. But I have a question about working in a ladies' shoe department. That must be quite humbling in a way.
Yeah, it was intense. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it was always such a, I always found ladies' shoes to be quite different to other departments that I worked in. Like, especially in the country store, like we would work, we'd sometimes be sent to other departments and things. So it was a very small store. And I always found like things to be quite interesting in the ladies' shoes department. And a lot of conversations were had, and a lot of, it was always a bit frantic. There was always people coming in, and, you know, it's kind of hard to put my finger on, but it's a different vibe, I think, to the work I was doing when I moved. I'd sometimes I'd pick up a shift here or there in other departments, and it felt like it was very, very different. And usually in the ladies department, you are surrounded by other women. They stereotypically put women in these departments. So I was around basically all other women. But then when I went to the electronics department, I was one of a handful of women. So it was a very, very different dynamic. And I was, you know, it just allowed me to, again, expand my horizons, again, having lots of interactions with different people from different backgrounds, also with men as well. And it just taught me so much about, you know, different people and how, you know, just about the world. It was very, very interesting to suddenly then be, I guess, in the minority in a non-typical area. I don't want to say that, but based on the you know, the numbers in the minority in that area, and sort of what that meant, and basically doing my work in such a way that, you know, showed that I was just as capable as anyone else to be doing this kind of work. I can sell, you know, a game console, or I can sell a TV. You know, it's something that, you know, it's not restricted to any sort of one particular person. But yeah, yeah, definitely I don't recommend working in lady shoes during sale time.
It's very intimate, I think, in a way, because it's a really, I don't know, and also there's just very straightforward hygiene stuff as well. But but like it's intimate. It can be embarrassing for the person who's trying on shoes. You know, that you have to provide the little socks that people wear, like trying the shoes on and everything. It's just kind of it's a whole thing, right? But then I hadn't really made the connection between being surrounded by just women who work in those departments and the conversations that would happen there, versus working in a tech department and learning how to do that and talk about that and the kind of conversations that go on there. All of these things will kind of build. Neither one is, no value judgment on that. It's just different, and it just gives you different capabilities moving forward. I worked in pubs when I was at university, so we had our pubs near the Crown Court. And so I got to speak to everybody from like QCs and solicitors, lawyers, to the people who were in the dock, to the criminals. They were usually drinking together, by the way. No, I'm not even joking. But so, you know, I just got this really broad and this really interesting way of kind of moving across that, and you know, chatting away to one person and then turning around and quoting a philosopher to another, and, you know, kind of being able to work across all those different what would you call it, like social boundaries and stuff like that. And I'm hearing that from you as well. Like there's this kind of breadth that we get from Saturday jobs, or, you know, the jobs we do to supplement our university life, or the job that we have when we come out of university and we're like, and what now? Do you know?
Yes, yeah.
I don't want to be a psychologist or a biologist in my situation. At that time, I didn't know, you know, I've moved back into the psychology area, but yeah, it's, yeah, joining the dots backwards is interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. Yeah, yeah.
So you met Hi. What happens next?
Yes. So now we're nearing the end of my university degree, and I actually received a job offer at the end of that time. So one of my, well, it wasn't a job offer to begin with. It was simply to join a one-day event with an international branch of the university. That basically there was a group of Indonesian journalists who were in Melbourne, and they needed someone who spoke the language.
So Jess, so are you fluent in Indonesian?
I was at a point, but now I haven't used it so much. So I definitely need to get back into reading a bit more to pick it back up again. But yeah, at that time, they needed somebody to be interviewed for, like, these journalists to interview, and so they. My university professor said, you know, I've heard about this. I know that you speak Indonesian, and would you be interested in doing it? I said, yeah, sure, I'll go along. So I went along for the day, and I remember walking in, and there was this single chair in the center of the room, and then it was like the paparazzi, like the whole like room was full of Indonesian journalists from different papers and things, and then they just started firing questions, and we just did this whole thing for like a couple of hours. Yeah.
Wow.
And at the end of it, they're like, do you want to come work for us? And I said, okay, like let's talk about it. So I ended up then going straight into working at the university as an interpreter and translator for all of these groups that were coming in. So we had, there were some amazing projects I got to be a part of, because this part of the university basically did development work and capacity building work. They would put in tenders for big projects that were worth, you know, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And they would basically fund these programs to bring people out from various different countries around the world. Specifically, I was working with the Indonesian groups. So we would get groups coming out, yeah, like who were journalists, like doctors and healthcare workers who were, you know, studying at our hospitals and things to learn our systems and ways of doing things. And, you know, basically my job was to make sure that the project ran smoothly here. I would, you know, take them all to their hotels and get bank accounts set up for them, and like basically answer any of their questions and, you know, help them out with whatever they needed. And that was a wonderful experience for me, because, you know, I was really able to use something that, you know, I think there's like a lot of people study languages at school and then don't have the opportunity then to use them outside of that, or maybe they decide not to. But I was able to just like run with it and just have these amazing opportunities and be in a place where they had the funding to do amazing things. And I got to be a part of it at such a young age. To just step right into that was really, you know, and I was still working at the department store at the time and I ended up, because I was working full time and I often had to be doing things out of hours for this job, I ended up letting go of the department store work and just doing this. And I did this basically for 6 or so months. And crazily, I decided, some people might think, I decided to leave to go travel the world. And it was very hard, because what a great job I had, what a great opportunity, you know, and, you know, the money was good and I was doing something that I really did enjoy. And the people I met, I still speak to many of them to this day. I know that I have reporters in Indonesia I can call anytime if I need coverage on something in Indonesian. So it was something that was really impactful, and it was definitely hard to leave, because logically it made no sense. And it didn't make sense to a lot of the people around me, because they're like, why would you give up a great job, you know? And you've just studied for 3 years to, the conventional path is then to go get a job. And, but there was something that was just something that was calling me so strongly that it didn't matter. It didn't matter. I just had to go. And at that time, it's sort of like Hai was thinking about doing something different. He was feeling a little bit like he wasn't sure where he wanted to go with his life, and he hadn't traveled before, and he really wanted to, maybe do something a bit different as well. And, I definitely knew that I wanted to go out and travel. I had done, at the end of my first year of university, I spent about a month in Bangladesh doing some development work there. And then I went on solo to do another about 6 weeks in India. And I'd been really like wanting to get back to India ever since. And so, I was at this point where I'm like, I definitely want to travel. I want to go to India. And he said, I'm really interested in going to Japan. And so this is where the seeds of Japan start coming in for me. It's not a place that I had ever thought about going to, not because I didn't want to, I just never thought about it. It just was not one of those countries that had come up on my radar yet. And so we just started planning this trip together. Like, why don't we just go together? And so, yeah, as I said, like I had, India on my list, he had Japan on his list. And I was like, well, I've got to go to Indonesia, because every time I would meet someone, these groups that were coming out, they're like, how long have you spent in Indonesia? And I said, actually, I've never been. And they're like, what? How is that possible? Like, and and you speak this language and things. I was like, no, I've never been. And so I'm like, I really want to go. Like, I should go. I should go. So we had these 3 countries that we wanted to go to: India, Japan, Indonesia. And we looked into, tickets for these places. And, this sort of path, this route was very unusual. And it was going to cost quite a lot of money for us to be able to, like on the flights, because it was quite an interesting, it's not a usual route. So we looked into it, we're like, well, for this money, we could get a round the world ticket and we can go to heaps more places. So then we just started expanding. We just started expanding this trip until it became a 6.5-month trip that took us, around the world. And with the round the world ticket, you stop off in basically every continent. And so we decided to go out on this big trip together. And this is a huge test, I think, for any relationship, at any time, I think, but maybe especially as a young relationship, it really tests like how, and you learn so much about each other very, very quickly. And this is a trip that I sort of credit to how close we are now as a couple, because we learned so much about each other in that short space of time. We were together 24 hours a day. And in the most, some of like very stressful situations, like a situation where we haven't slept for days, or we haven't, we're, facing, problems on the road, and we have to work out how to fix them, you see what that other person is like under pressure, how they are, in all kinds of different situations. So that became like a huge, huge trip. And we did go to India. Indonesia, unfortunately, had to get taken off the drawing board because it didn't fit in with the flights and everything. So still hadn't been.
Have you been now?
I have, yes,
okay.
I have now. But I haven't spent very long there.
Yeah.
But so basically we did that. And then, we ended up in 2 months of it was in Japan, actually. And there we did 1 month with a homestay family in Tokyo. And the rest of the time we were like traveling around. And that is when I realized like Japan just hooked both of us right away. Like Hai already had an interest in Japan, mostly because he's into cars. And, he was very drawn to Japanese culture already, but I knew nothing about it. And there was just something about that just clicked for me. Like I loved it. He loved it. And we had an amazing time with our homestay family. They really like made our trip something very, very special. And we loved it. And we were sad to leave, but of course we had all these other exciting places that we were going to. So, you know, we kept going. You know, next was Egypt, so off we went. And then we, you know, continued on this trip. And then, you know, our homestay family actually, our homestay father, he had a sister in America, and he said, you know what, like, we've been thinking about visiting her, you know, why don't we come meet you when you go to New York at the end of the year? So we all ended up being together in New York, and that was the last stop of our trip. And I was wondering why I was being kind of weird about us not going to the Empire State Building together, because I'm like, why wouldn't we? Like, you know, we're going around doing all this stuff together, and it was a bit strange. I like, okay, whatever, like we'll just go another day. Anyway, it turns out that he was planning to propose at the Empire State Building. So we got engaged at the end of that trip, basically the last day of that trip on top of the Empire State Building.
How old were you?
I was 22.
Oh, so young.
So young. Like,
Yeah.
I probably didn't think so at the time, but now when I look back, I'm like, oh my God, I was so young.
So nice.
So that's kind of how we like ended that trip, you know, came back engaged. And basically what I had done during that year was I had deferred my 4th year of my university degree. So I could have finished it 3 years and got a bachelor's degree in Australia, but I had wanted to do my honours year and make it a 4-year degree. But I had basically decided, because I was, you know, doing this job at the university, and, you know, I knew that I wanted to travel as well. So basically I took the year off, which was very, very simple process in Australia. Like, basically went to the office, sign a form, that's it, see you next year. Yeah. So came back to do my honors year. So came back engaged, and I ended up doing, I was able then to use my Indonesian language again, which this kind of comes up again and again, and it's been very interesting how it's come up in my life. So basically I was able to get a scholarship to do some research in Timor-Leste, which is also known as East Timor, and who were colonized by Indonesia. So a lot of people there, I mean, the population has grown up speaking Indonesian. At that time, only very young people didn't know how to speak it. And so, you know, again, through my professors and things, knowing that I spoke the language, they said, hey, there's this opportunity. Like, I really recommend that you think about it and go for it. And so I remember taking the scholarship call at this hostel in Bolivia, and I asked the guy at the reception desk if I could use the phone behind the desk, and like taking that call and doing the interview and everything. And yeah, ended up doing all of my field research in East Timor, and yeah, conducting all of my research in Indonesian and interviewing people there. And people were very, very, very gracious in using. Even at that time, it was not lost on me that I was using the language of the colonizer. But people were very, very gracious and said, you know, this is a common language that we have, so let's use it to communicate with each other. And, you know, was able to have amazing conversations there. And that's basically, what I was doing my research on, was around the elections that were happening, the first democratic elections that the country was independently organizing themselves. So I was able to go in as a UN observer and observe the election process and make sure it was run, you know, fairly and smoothly. And so I'm a bit of an election nerd and political nerd. Like, I love that kind of stuff. And so what a week to be interviewing you. Absolutely. Yeah. I've been nerding out over the US elections, like the process of it, you know. And so yeah, basically that's what I was doing at that time. And so yeah, came back from that. I finished my thesis, and then worked for another year. This time I was doing a different position at the university. Again, in research position.
And this was at the same time as doing your honours?
So yeah, I was at the same time and after as well. So I was at that time, I was doing my honours, and I was also doing some part-time work at the university. When I'd finished, they were like, come full-time because we need someone who speaks this language, and we're doing a lot of projects in this area. So that's basically what I was doing.
So I just want to stop here and note a few things that are coming up for me. So the first one is that you just have this incredible work ethic. Do you have any idea where that comes from? Because I know these days, as you may know, my goal is to only work 50% of the time I'm awake. But I'm nearly 50 now, so I'm like, that's my goal, which sounds terribly gauche, doesn't it? But I want to model a good work-life balance for people. But when I was young, I also had an incredible work ethic. Like when I was at university, I was working in pubs during the day and evening, during the weekend, evening. And I also captained the badminton team. I was also like, I wasn't the most amazing student. I was also like a party girl. So how I did all that, I don't know, but I realized that my parents were both teachers. And so they basically had two jobs. The first job was to be at school during the day and teach people. And the second job was to come home and then mark all the books and prepare the lessons for the next day. So, a lot of that kind of entrepreneurial stuff that you and I get involved with, where you have to do lots of work behind the scenes and there's no particular working hours. I was raised with that. Plus, they were really active in the community, and they also did sports when we were younger, and the dad when he was older, and all this kind of stuff. So I really see that both my brother and I got this really strong work ethic and can-do attitude towards life a lot. And I can see that with you, this incredible work ethic. It's like, oh, I thought you graduated by the time you got this job with the university doing the Indonesian interpretation, etc. No, you were still at university. Then you popped off and did a kind of gap year. Then you came back. It's like, it's really interesting. So that's one thing I just wanted to note. The second thing is, I like when you said, like, logically it made no sense. So that's also interesting to me from the coaching perspective. Is there's that time, because I'm knowing you quite well, not super well, but quite well as well. I know you like to do your research, you like to be thorough before you make a decision, you like to kind of assess it all. On the other hand, it seems like sometimes you just go, do you know what, logically this doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to use my instinct or intuition to make that decision. Tell me where I'm wrong.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right.
And then the third thing is just a very practical and historical thing. So when I hear East Timor, I hear what's reported to me through the different colonizer lens, not the colonizer lens that you were talking about. So I just think of this place in conflict where this is this and that and that. But you're telling me a very different story. And that's just, I've just got goosebumps on my knees thinking about that, because it's like, again, it's just like this constant revelation of like, of this. It's just endless, isn't it? This kind of revelation of of information being delivered from all kinds of sources, and they're all research. The sources that they come from are research. It just depends on which lens you look at them through. Now, I'm not talking about kind of conspiracy theories and stuff like that, where you have to look at things through all these different lenses. No, I'm talking about places where things are well researched and historically lined up, and they can still make sense, and we tell the stories in the same way, but they just come out. And that's why this is called legends. Because the way you're telling this story today could be different to the way you tell it tomorrow, but it's still all true. It's not, yes. It's not some fantasy. It could be a fantasized version. I don't mind, to be fair, but it's just very interesting. I always, before I do each interview, I always go to the dictionary definition of legend, and it says something along the lines of a story that may or may not be true, something like that, like an account. It's like an Arthurian account of something that may or may not be true. And that's why I call it a legend. I think some people may mistakenly be like, that person's not a legend, because they're not like some epic star like Michael Jordan or something, or Serena Williams, or I don't know, Bill Gates. Walk into any bookshop, throw a stone, and you've got a book about Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. And these stories are just as interesting to somebody going in their garage as to me. So so it just really highlights that. So 3 things: your work ethic, the use of intuition at times, or the use of something other than logic to make your decisions, plus the way we tell our stories influences the way that they land, and colonizer lenses and all different
Yes.
kinds of lenses. Very
Yes.
interesting, Jessica. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, because if not, we'll just move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
All right. So what happens next is the question.
Yeah, what happens next?
So you're engaged to high, you come back, you complete your degree. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. During, we had already decided that we wanted to move to Japan. Like we'd already made this decision.
Yeah.
Like we thought, we love Japan. Like how can we get back to that place that we love so much? And so basically when I finished my university degree, we said, okay, the next year we'll work, we'll get married, and during this time we'll prepare ourselves to make a move to Japan. I was working at the university during the daytime, and then at nighttime I'd go down one level and I'd study Japanese 2 nights a week. So did Hai. And I remember at that time, because, I was now in a situation where I was like working side by side with these university professors who were teaching me during my course. And, like I was on the same level as them and saw them every day. And I remember that at that time, like the Japanese department was also on the same floor. So I'd have to, every time I'd go to the printer around exam time, I'd have to be like, I'm going to go use the printer. Are you printing any exams right now? So like I wouldn't be able to see it. And yeah, I just, at that time we knew that we wanted to go. So we said, okay, like let's do our best to put ourselves in as best position as we can to hit the ground running, at least know some basics, because the first time we went, we didn't know anything. And there's part of that I absolutely love, like jumping into a place and having absolutely no idea how to read, anything that's going on around you. I think Japan is an amazing place for that kind of cultural sense, like that overwhelm, like sensation. But we decided if we're going to live there and work there, that knowing more would be beneficial. So we'd already started planning that. And so we did that all throughout the year. We got married, and, we wanted to make sure that we paid for all of that ourselves, and then we'd save enough money to be able to go and live in Japan, at least for a while, without having a job, so that we'd have time to kind of work things out. So yeah, 6 months after we got married, we were on a plane to Japan. And we just landed there. Like we didn't have any jobs. We went on a working holiday visa, which is an amazing visa. If any people who are listening under 30 who have the opportunity to do it, like it is the most amazing way to be able to travel without, being tied to a job or anything like that. And so we just went with that. We got it. We didn't have a permanent place to stay, but we had those amazing homestay family friends who were like, please come back and stay with us again. And so they really helped us for the first few months of our stay. We stayed with them.
How long sorry, Jess, how long did you stay in Japan for total?
Well, from the time that we arrived and the time that we left, just more recently, it was a period of a decade. But as you'll probably hear, we had periods of time where we were traveling outside of the country.
Right. So I'm interested to get into kind of, so I'm assuming, just tell me where I'm wrong again, that you went into English teaching in order to support yourselves?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
this is it's a standard kind of story for Japan. But so when did Notes of Nomads, Notes of Nomads, please listeners, not from Nomads, that's a different blog. Notes of Nomads, and Travel Solo Anyway. When did that, so you arrived there, you did your working holiday visa initially, you got a job, you were staying with your homestay family, you got jobs then, but you were also traveling at the same time, going in and out, is that right?
At that time, no, we just stayed in Japan because we were there was so much to explore around us, and we were so happy to be there, so we were just enjoying Japan and Tokyo, and just this, so there was so much going on. We just, I think especially those first few years in Japan, were just really like some of my best memories. I just really was just enjoying myself, even though I felt like some of the work that I was doing wasn't necessarily forever or anything like that. I was just really enjoying being in that place, and just immersing myself in, you know, all of this stuff that was going on around me. And so basically, yeah, we stayed for a couple of years. And like during that time, I was doing some volunteer work with Oxfam and things. And I was organizing monthly, you know, pub quizzes and doing many events. And at one of these events, I met somebody who was telling me about Peace Boat. And I was like, okay, what's Peace Boat? And I suddenly learned about this, you know, amazing opportunity that you can go teach English on this, you know, ship that circumnavigates the globe. And, you know, it was very, very different to a regular cruise. As I know, you know, and you've had guests on before talking about it. It's, there was just something in that moment. I was like, okay, that night I went and researched, and I had a lot, my goodness, like I have to do this. And I was like, yeah, I think you should do it. It would be amazing for you. And so basically the next year that I was in Japan, my goal was to get on the 73rd voyage. And everything I did was basically in order to make myself, put myself in a better position to get on that. So I did all like English certifications, you know, teaching certifications to try to up my skills. So I had some formal qualifications behind what I was doing.
So at that point you decided to do that kind of very scientific thing of getting things together. So this is kind of for listeners, this is like the other side of using your intuition. It's like you line up the real world stuff that needs to happen in the real world in order to make you more valuable, more likely, more skilled, actually.
Yes. And I thought, like, if even like whatever happens, I know that I put myself in the best position I could have put myself in, and I won't have any, like, I wouldn't have any nagging feeling like, oh, what if I had done this? You know, what if I'd spent more time preparing for it? You know, so I just basically said, okay, I can do these things. This is in my power. I can have these things, so I will get that done. And so, long story short, I went for the interview, I got it, and I got on the 73rd voyage as I'd planned, and, you know, went on this trip by myself. So I was staying in Tokyo.
Scandalous to leave your husband behind.
I know, so many people thought so. Like the amount of people who just could not believe. Like could not believe, or there must be trouble in paradise, right? Because why would you leave your husband for 3 months, you know?
So that's where the Travel Solo Anyway blog was.
Yes, this is where it was born before it was born, you know. Like I had
before it was born.
I had so many interactions with people, you know, then and subsequently, who just couldn't believe that was even an option. Right, like this, they hadn't even thought about it.
It's mind-blowing that one could take that much time away from their husband or wife, or and that's viable, and that it's available, it's trusting, it's whatever you decide your alliance is there. So Peace Boat basically, that, did you do a full voyage then, or the whole thing?
Yes, I did.
Was it a global north or global south trip?
Global
was it
south.
Both? Pardon?
Global south
trip.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that was like incredible. And
what were your takeaways from that, Jess? How did that, like, what was the kind of evolution of you through that?
Well, interestingly, one of the big things that came out of it was, again, Indonesia coming back into my world. And it also, I credit Peace Boat to being the start of Notes and Nomads and everything, because this was before I had a blog, before anything. And basically this voyage was happening right after 3/11, the Tohoku earthquake that happened in 2011.
Oh, and Peace Boat
and we left in
that.
Yes, and we left in April. So, you know, this it happened in March. So it was still very, very fresh, and they were wondering, like, should we go?
Yeah.
Basically, should we cancel this voyage? Is it right to do this, you know, whole thing? when so many people are suffering.
Yeah.
But then in the end, they decided to continue with it because it was a way that we could come together and band together and try to do something positive around it. And so basically during the voyage, there were some meetings, especially towards the end. They said, we're doing activities on the ground. We are looking for volunteers to help us. And so I was like, wow, like this is something that I really feel strongly about because, like Japan has given me so much. This is a way for me to give something back. I'm in a position to give something back at this moment. So I'm willing and able to go.
That's interesting because both then in that case we have a connection around that, because around that time I was the president of FEW, for Empowering Women in Japan, a professional networking organization, and Peace Boat became our sponsor that year. And I actually I went up to Tohoku 2 or 3 times with Peace Boat.
Wow.
And the British Chamber of Commerce, I think, were the. So at the time you were traveling, I was connected in that way. So that's an interesting little connection that both of us have.
Absolutely.
Let's just take a moment to honor that was on the back of an unbelievable tragedy, an unimaginable tragedy. And when I say unimaginable, unless you've stood there and looked around, the caverns of your imagination, I don't think are big enough to open that up, frankly.
That's
And
so
no.
true.
Maybe they are, I don't know, but it's so anyway, I just want to take a moment to honor the people up there and their trials and tribulations.
Yes.
So you come back from Peace Boat, and then what happens next? So then you come back into like post 2000, because it was a very clear before and after of that. Like, I don't like, I have to remember that there was before that, and now there's after that. My whole life is through a totally different lens.
Yes.
And I live by the sea now as well, so I'm constantly like vigilant where my tsunami escape routes are. It's not funny, but it's it's ironic. So so you come back from Peace Boat, you've got all this kind of knowledge and etc. that Indonesia cycles back into your life. You realize that life is about more than you, and there's things that you want to do out there in the world. What happens next? So tell me about the next phase. What comes out of that?
Yeah. So the next phase was basically like we'd been back. I'd been back maybe a week or so, and Hai and I go up to Tohoku, and we are camping out on the grounds of the university, and where everyone was at the time. That was kind of volunteer HQ, and then we went straight into that, and I felt like I had spent so many days out with the fishermen out on boats and trying to help them recultivate oysters and things like that. And I just felt like, wow, like these stories are not being told. These are, the international media at this point, it's several months down the track, right? We're already into like late summer of that year. And much of the international media had moved on. And I felt that it was so important because like even at that time, even though I'd been away for several months and was coming to the area after several months of volunteers being there, it was still unimaginable. Like the scene, like as you said, like the scenes that you see up there, it just was beyond imagination. And I felt like we need to keep talking about this. We need to make sure that people understand that this is not a short-term thing. These people are going to need our support for such a long time, and the rebuilding process is going to take a really long time. And I think that these stories really need to be told. So that's when I started the blog. It wasn't called Notes of Nomads at the time. I started off under another name, and then it went to my name, and it changed. It had a few different iterations, but basically, the first things that I wrote were all stories from the ground. And I still keep them up on the blog, even though they're definitely not like SEO friendly or anything like that, but I will always keep them there because they are the beginning of everything. And they are also so meaningful to me because of the people I met up there. So that's basically how I started into this world of travel blogging before I realized that that's exactly what I was doing. And
so this is interesting, Jess. So what are you saying then, that you look at travel through the lens of telling the stories of those places, but
yes,
rather than telling the story? I don't know. Oh, okay.
it's both of my story, and then sometimes, like, I mean, there's my personal story that is through all of it. But when I go to a place and something is not my experience, not my personal experience, then I feel like I want to give the mic over to someone else to be like, you tell me what it is for you, rather than me coming in necessarily and saying, this is what it is. I can say, you know, this is my experience, and, you know, this is how things were for me. But I also want to, I don't want to put words in people's mouths. I want to give them the opportunity to say what they want to say, and, you know, tell that, like, use my blog as a way to get that story out there. And so, yeah, it was definitely, you know, part of my personal story and things I learned, but also, especially at that time, it was really about what can I do to help people understand what it is, and what is it that you want people to understand about this process, and what's going on here. So that's kind of where it all started. And, you know, at this time also, I'm thinking about, like, what is my next step? You know, I've had this big, you know, massive change with Peace Boat. You know, like, I've met all these different people, and, you know, on the boat, I was working as an English teacher, but you are also responsible for creating different events on the boat, and you have to do basically, you know, you can pick anything that you like, but you have to self-organize some event. And I was thinking, what is my event going to be? I had some ideas before going on, but then when I got on the boat, turns out that my housekeeper for the cabin was Indonesian. A lot of the crew were from Indonesia. And suddenly I'm using Indonesian every day again with the crew and everything, and became sort of like friends with the crew. And I thought, well, like, all of my students were coming to me and saying, like, how do you say this in Indonesian? How do you say that? Like, I want to talk to my housekeeper too, or I've fallen in love with my housekeeper. Like, how can I tell them, like, blah, 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 like, tell me all this, you know, language. And I thought, well, what I can do is do maybe like a Indonesian sort of 101 for people who want to know, like, how to, you know, say good morning, or, you know, whatever to the crew. And so I ended up doing that. And it was quite an unusual situation, because I wanted my housekeeper actually to teach with me. And I thought that was, it was just very, like, it was very obvious to me that I should have somebody there from who is a native speaker, and I just thought it would be a wonderful collaboration to do together, rather than just me going up there and saying, you know, how to say things. So it was not very usual, but I got special permission from the captain for the housekeeper to actually come up onto that level of the boat, which is usually not allowed, because they are only allowed in certain areas, and they're not supposed to really be mingling necessarily with passengers in certain areas of the boat. So he was able to come up from his usual, like, area and come up and teach with me. And we did that together. And so basically, based on that experience, I was like, wow, I'm like, weirdly, like, I'm reconnecting again with Indonesian, which I hadn't really, you know, I hadn't thought it would have such an impact. I didn't think it would have such an impact on my life. And I thought, you know, wow, I should really go to Indonesia, because I still haven't been, right? And so I decided then that I would get a job in Indonesia for a while. Let's see. So basically 3 months after I returned from Peace Boat, I was in Indonesia, and said bye to Hi again for another 3 months. And I ended up in
Japan at the time, did he?
Stayed in Japan, yeah. So that year, basically, I spent 6 months with him and 6 months with Ahim. And yeah, so I ended up in Bali, and again, like, this really expanded my horizons. It's where I also then started, okay, like, now that I've finished this volunteering, I've gotten all my stories up about volunteering so far, at least. Okay, like, now I'm in a different place with another story to tell. Maybe I can write things about where I'm staying in Indonesia. And a lot of things did happen. Like I was attacked by a dog and had to get 5 rabies vaccinations. And it was just a lot of stuff happened during those few months. And I was able to, put up some stories about that. And this is, I ended up not staying in Indonesia longer than 3 months. It ended up not being that particular opportunity, didn't feel like the right one for me. And so again, I just listened to my gut, and which was telling me go back to Japan. And so I went back to Japan, and that was already like at a point where I said, if you want to stay in Indonesia, I'll move. Like, we'll just move there if you want to go.
How do you navigate those relationship conversations there then? How do you guys navigate that kind of negotiation, or is it just baked into your relationship? What's there? Because it must seem mind-blowing for some people. My husband and I spend quite a lot of time apart. He used to go on quite long business trips to Chile, and I used to go home for like months at a time when, and stuff like that. These days we don't quite so much, but how do you navigate that? Like, for some people that just feels scandalous. For me, it's unbelievably empowered, very radical. I like it a great deal.
It's not the first time someone's asked me that question. and it is really baked into our relationship. I don't really know what to say to people when they say, like, how do I have that, or how do I do that, or how do I have that conversation? It's something that is really rooted in a very deep respect for one another. And Hai has always told me that he never wants me to not do something because of our relationship. He never wants to stand in the way of a life that I could have had, if it was just the fact, if I'm staying there for him.
If he's going to force you to be and you're not allowed access or you're not offered access to the bank accounts, have some babies, and then, all right, interesting. But as I hope we'll get to, Hai has an interesting story as well, which might also be, might also influence his ability to, which is not, I mean, we haven't even mentioned that yet, but like it's such a threat to the patriarchy, this story.
Yeah.
But then, he's not from that, so
yeah
like, his story's so radically different. And again, I'm not going to tell that story for you. So we are getting towards the time's up, so let's move it on a bit.
Sure. So
Indonesia. So you come back from Indonesia, but so basically what you're telling me is that it's baked into your relationship there. Both of you have different kind of perspectives on things. You have a very different lens on things because of the way that you were raised, but also these kind of experiences you've had, perhaps interpreting and seeing things through a different kind of lens. Hai has a very different background as well. You come together, you get married very young, which is also like, woo, for our generations anyway.
Yes.
And then you go off on your own multiple times, and it's, again, many, many ways to lead a life. And this is why it's interesting to ask these questions and to let people know what's available based on just slight shifts in consciousness, or slight shifts. That's not easy to say. Slight shifts in, or mega shifts, depending on who you are, in the way that you have conversations and what you, and I don't like this word, but I'm going to say it, allow each other to do or make available for one another. Yes. I mean, this was pre-children for you as well, but again, that's so that's probably something that's shifted too. I don't know. I can't, who knows? And also we're in COVID, so we don't even know what that looks like after, 2022 or whenever things get back to the new normal, whatever that is. My best guess that we'll always be having some travel restrictions in the future, but that's just my prediction.
Yes.
Again, this is November 2020, so that prediction could have come. If somebody's watching this in the future, drop a comment to tell us what's happening. I don't even know what that means. Okay, so back to Japan then. So you've been
Yes.
in Indonesia for 3 months, you come back.
Come back, and essentially, yeah, like to cut a long story short, we stay for another couple of years. Then, you know, by this time, the blog has kind of started blossoming into something bigger. And we're getting more and more, you know, people. Well, I mean, it was sort of accidental at first, to be honest. As I said, I kind of went into it just with the idea of telling a story, you know, that this story had to be told, and then adding some more. And then, you know, started getting a little bit of feedback from people and people commenting. I'm like, wow, okay, like people are interested in this. And that kind of motivated me more to write a lot more. And so essentially it was a lot of me just spending a lot of time creating content. You know, I was so excited to be in Japan, and I spent all of my free time going out to festivals, doing stuff, collecting information, coming back. And, you know, even though I was working, you know, at that time I was working at an English conversation school part of the time, and, you know, I'd finish work at 10, I'd get home at about 11 o'clock, have something to eat, and then I'd be writing again for the next couple of hours. And I did that for a couple of years, just to be able to get that content was so important for me. It felt so important for me to share with people. And I was so excited to get that feedback from people. And so basically it started going from there. And then I sort of felt that, wow, like this is very Japan centric. And as much as I love Japan, I really want to tell stories from other places too. You know, I almost started having this panic of like, oh, wow, like I'm spending so much time here that I'm not seeing all this other stuff that I want to see. So then we decided, okay, like let's go travel again. So we ended up going for a year and a half. We didn't know at the time how long it was going to be. It was just like, let's go. We planned basically going from taking the Trans-Mongolian and Trans-Siberian train from Beijing all the way over to Moscow. So we were going up like, through China, Mongolia, and across Russia. And before that, we actually did, and this is sort of important, I guess, maybe to the latest story and Hai's story, is that we did go to Vietnam. And that was the first time he had been since leaving Vietnam as a young child. Why does this relate to
Hai's story?
He is Vietnamese. He was born in Vietnam. He left as a refugee when he was a young child. And
how old?
He was about 1.5, 2 years old. So he doesn't remember it.
Right.
And so for him, you know, he's grown up in Australia, and he is obviously very influenced by Vietnamese culture. And he spoke Vietnamese at home, and he still speaks it with his family, and he has a sense of the culture, but he has never been back to Vietnam. And so for him, it was like going to Vietnam essentially for the first time. And we decided to go to his very rural hometown along the Mekong Delta and just spend some time there. At that time, he wasn't really ready, or wasn't looking to sort of pursue his ancestry or meeting perhaps a distant relative or anything. It was more just to see, like, where do I come from? Like, what was the place like that I grew up in? And I remember we arrived there, and he was like laughing. He's like, wow, I was a real country boy. Because, he's always grown up in the city here. He didn't have the countryside experience that I had. So he's always lived in cities. And so his childhood was quite different. So to see that he actually came from a very rural area was, that was interesting for him. So yeah, basically we took this trip, and it was amazing. Although it was harder in many ways at that time. It was very different to the first round the world trip we did together, where we didn't have a blog, we didn't have anything, and we just went out and traveled. And now we're feeling this sense of responsibility to get content out. People are wanting content. Now we have social media. Now we have, like YouTube, we have all of this stuff. And we started a YouTube channel on that trip. And it became very overwhelming. Like, we found that we were just like, okay, we have to stay in one place for like a month. Like, let's just rent out an Airbnb for a month just to get all this like blog stuff done. And we were finding ourselves more and more as we went along wanting to slow down. Like, we're like, okay, let's do a house sit. And like, if we saw a house sit for a couple of months, in some place, we're like, oh yes, that would be amazing. Like, we can just stay there and, just sit down and do stuff. And we were really, I guess we were starting to become very tired. As much as we loved the traveling bit, the traveling and working bit was totally different. And so we were kind of trying to negotiate what that meant. And, but things were looking good. Like that's, I think, you know, basically 2013, 2014 were really a turning point for our blog. You know, that's when we, you know, we did get like several awards. We were able, because we were traveling and we didn't have a set plan, we were able to go to, you know, massive conferences in Europe and meet people. And, you know, we met so many of our blogging colleagues who we knew only by name or through their own blogs. So it expanded our horizons a lot. We were able to meet so many people in person and develop those connections. And so essentially, yeah, we do all this. So we end up being chosen as 2 of the top 50 travel bloggers in the world to go to this conference in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lankan Airlines is sponsoring the flights. And they said, when you leave Sri Lanka, we'll send you anywhere in the world that we fly to.
So before we go on here, Jess, I just want to ask you at this point, how many followers do you have?
Oh gosh, I honestly don't know. I mean, I would say at this time, probably in terms of how many people were visiting our website per month, it was about maybe 25,000 at this point.
Wow. Okay.
And so, you know, in today's terms, not so many, but we're building, and it was, you know, quite a long time ago. And
how about,
you know,
YouTube followers?
YouTube followers, probably a couple of thousand, maybe. We didn't really, we jumped into that like maybe just a couple of months. Like we only had done it for a couple of months, I think, before we came back. But okay. It was difficult to be like filming, like recording, coming back and editing and trying to get things up. But we had started it, and we did have quite a few things going up. And we were starting to get into video at this point, because video is a very, very different skill to photography. Yeah. And so it was something that we were kind of learning as we went along.
Right. And so yeah, we just kind of constant building, like these things come in, you keep building, and then you keep trying to skill up and adjusting your skills, like really being very professional about it. Another quick fire question for you is, what's your most popular post or YouTube video, and how many views did it get?
Yes, that's interesting.
I might be able to answer this for you.
it's often the ones that you don't expect, I think, that are the ones that blow up. So
is it about Japanese toilet or something like that?
It isn't about a Japanese toilet, but although we have one about an onsen that's been quite popular. But I think that the most popular one on our YouTube channel is actually one about cinnamon and where cinnamon comes from. And I think it's nearing about 400,000 views at the moment.
Wow.
Oddly, that one took off thanks to SEO. When you think about YouTube as being, you know, the second biggest search platform on the internet, you know, it's a place where people can find, you know, this information. And it's been strange, like some of the things that have been popular, but yeah, I think that would probably be, that's definitely the most popular video. And the most popular blog post is probably one we did about Kobe beef, and some Japanese related blog posts. I remember, I got quite a lot of backlash from the American beef industry while we were traveling when that one went a bit viral. So it's,
oh wow! So then you become political porn.
I did, yes, yeah. And that one sort of, that post has been consistently like up there as the most popular for, you know, probably 7 or 8 years, or whenever I put it up, when it's like 2012 or something, I wrote it.
Wow.
So yeah, it's interesting.
That's a whole other thing I'm going to have to drag and drop from my thing, where it's like, oh wow, so you don't get to be in control of your stuff, because then outside influencers start trying to, big business starts trying to influence you.
Yes. And that's something that is really, you know, I've been very guarded about the kinds of things that I put on the blog. I've always been very careful about the things that I share, the things that, not in terms of like that I don't share things. I share a lot of vulnerable things on the blog. I share a lot of myself on the blog. But I do want to keep it independent, which has often led to, you know, me having to decline certain opportunities where people want to influence the content, because I want the readers to always trust that this is our independent point of view. And
well, isn't that interesting, Jess? Because for every person like you, there's probably 50 people who have taken that on, and then it looks like it's their authentic voice, but actually it's all sponsored by somebody.
Yeah, and that's something we've had to grapple with. Is certainly, you know, we have lost opportunities because of that, or haven't made as much money because of that. But it's something that I still stand by, and I don't regret making that decision, because it's definitely something that I think it's so important just to hold that trust and respect for the readers. And if they don't trust you, then ultimately, what are you doing? Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, that's really interesting. Is it the word I'm going to use is integrity there. I mean, I honestly don't blame anybody for wanting to make some money, but there's plenty of ways to do that. Yeah, interesting. But as a viewer, it's always good for us to have in mind that there could be that running underneath other things. I think that's really important for us to kind of understand the lens through which we are being diverted in order to kind of help somebody to, and again, I want people to make money. I want to give people my money to purchase their goods, but yeah, amazing. Yeah. Good one, Jets. So let's fast forward a bit further into so what happens after that trip? So you did that trip and you were exhausted and you were trying to do all this video, and I know you're incredibly diligent as well. And very, very focused and very, what we say in Japanese, majime.
Yes, I think what you're trying to, yeah.
Serious. I think it means serious-minded and very,
yes.
Because as you can see, as you can hear, listeners, Jess is not not an unfunny person. She's a tremendous company, but very focused and very majime. How would you translate?
It's almost like I'm a bit of a sort of perfectionist, or it is sort of like hardworking, or just being very dedicated.
Dedicated, dedicated maybe is a good one, I think. Yeah, dedicated's a good word. Perfectionist, you can't be a perfectionist and churn out that much content without having a nervous breakdown, actually. And I think that's probably where you were heading.
That's where I've been. Yeah, that's where I've been, certainly. Like that's the difficulty that I was facing, right? Like how to then get the content out without, to make sure that it was at the level that I wanted to be, to make sure that I was fact checking, to make sure that I knew that, you know, I was sending out something out into the world that I would be happy to put my name to. But that is, it's hard. It's very, very hard to juggle that. And
it is hard to juggle that, Jess. I really, I mean, I admire you, but I admire you. And I might also admire somebody who goes, you know what, I'm going to take $100,000, well, however many, from the American Beef Association and make that part of the focus of I might admire that too. You know, as long as it was transparent, like sponsored by the American Beef Association. Unless it was like Kobe beef is a myth or something like that, then I'm like, enough. But you know, whatever it is, their cows aren't really cows. You know, I don't know, because it does spin out into that area. It does, yeah. But it's like, anyway, I think it's really interesting to hear these different approaches to doing things and people's integrity and so on. And we have to review it all the time, because at the end of the day, we need money to live, just as the woman who works in, you know, the Gap needs money to sell the pants, or, you know, just as the person who works in Gucci needs money to sell the belts, you know, it's
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you've stayed out of that kind of murkiness. Murkiness. Anyway, that particular way of doing things. So let's get a bit more up to date then. What after that trip then? I mean, there's massive life events that happened to you following this, and some brilliant essays that you wrote. And I'm going to let you take the lead on this.
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, we were in Sri Lanka and we're about to fly out, and they said, "Where do you want to go?" And we said, "Japan." We're ready to go back to, we need to be in a place where we can just be for a while, a place that we know, and a place where we can just kind of regroup and decide what's next. And so then, basically started to get more into the travel writing in Japan. When we got back, very soon after, we won an award in Kyushu, a tourism award, and that took us to different places. And then
Kyushu is the southernmost island. No, the southernmost main island of Japan, right? So
that's right.
4 main islands in the archipelago, and
yes.
that's it's not exactly south. It feels like it's south, because in my mind
it does, yeah.
Sausage, but it's not like a sausage. It's more like a hot dog. So it's kind of down here, right?
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
And so we started getting more into doing the travel writing and photography side of things, and but during this time, I'm starting to think, okay, like after a year or two trying to build up like videos and content and things, and then thinking about like really trying to look inside myself and think, what is it that is next? And at this point, I'm getting into my 30s, and I'm starting to think, is family going to be part of our story? Like, are we going to have children or not? And I start to think about that a lot. It starts to consume me in a way, like I'm just thinking about it all the time. And I very honestly was in this place where it's like, I didn't really mind either way, have children or don't have children. I'm happy. Like, I have a good life. I have so many opportunities to do things. But what I really wanted to feel was some kind of sign or some feeling of intuition that has guided me in so many other, ways in my life, to tell me which way I should go. Because in every other situation, I've been very drawn to something. Those trips that I took overseas, that leaving the job, at the university, that felt just so right. And I was in this place where it's just, I didn't know which way was right. I could go this way, I could go that way. And I have no idea which way I want to go. And, it's something that I felt like I just wanted to be clear about. Like, I wanted that decision to be made, because I feel like there's a relief in having decided to do something, or feeling like something was the right path. And I was very
How was that made for you, Jess?
Well, it was interesting, because a lot of people ask me, and what was it that made you feel that parenting was something that you wanted to do? And honestly, it was just something that I just started to feel like that was the right path. There wasn't any particular moment. There wasn't any, like epiphany or anything. It was just one day I woke up and thought, yeah, I think I do.
So it was deliberate then. Your pregnancy was deliberate.
Yes. And so very much so. And I started thinking, okay, I went into the science area and thought, like, okay, what do I need to do in order to prepare for a pregnancy? Do I need some vaccinations? Do I need whatever? And so I start going to these doctor's appointments and things to talk to them about like what I would need to do. And obviously that's not 100% necessary, but I thought, I'm in a position where I can do these things, right? This is something I can control. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of pregnancy or anything, but I can, put myself in a position where like I can protect myself, or, like things like that, or protect the baby by having these things already done beforehand.
So what happens next?
Yeah. So basically I go to those things. I hadn't even like told Hai about that. I knew that he really wanted to have kids, and he would be happy, very happy, if I said, okay, like, let's have children. But I just went and did all those things, got everything ready. And then we decided that we'd start a family. And I did end up becoming pregnant. And I found out just before our 10th wedding anniversary. And we were about to go to Taiwan for that. And so anyway, like I found out before, but I decided to tell Hai in Taiwan. I thought like, I'll tell him on our anniversary. Like that seems like a nice time.
That was your Empire State Building moment.
That was my Empire State Building moment, right? So I didn't want to just be like, oh yeah, by the way, because it was such a monumental thing. And so we went. And what ended up happening was, I told him.
Jess, can I just ask you quickly, are you going to just tell us the story frankly now?
Yes, if you would like me to.
At this, I would love you to, but I just want to put a quick note in here that if any of you have been through any kind of loss of pregnancy or children or anything, that we're going to talk about that now. And I just want to put in a quick note to prepare yourself, or to just let this be where you finish your journey with Jess. Okay, Jess,
Tracy,
thank
that's
you.
very important. Thank you
Yeah.
for mentioning that.
You're welcome.
So basically we went, and, you know, our anniversary came, and I told him, and we're all happy, and starting to think, you know, I'm already like running through my mind about, you know, getting a doctor or whatever in Japan and things like that. And unfortunately, I did have a miscarriage at the end of that, towards the end of that trip. And so, you know, ended up
In Taiwan.
In Taiwan. So a place where, you know, we don't live, we don't speak the language, and, you know, ended up at the hospital there, and, you know, being told that, yeah, it wasn't, like, I already knew in my heart of, like, I already knew, like, because of what had happened before that, you know, the bleeding and everything. And I went there, and I already knew, like, it was just something that I can't explain. Like, I didn't, as much as I, you know, you always hope that something is different, but I knew that was the end. And so basically went through that there, and ended up having to, you know, a few days later, going back to Japan. Meanwhile, like, the miscarriage is still going on. It's something that takes time to complete, and ended up back.
I don't realize that. I think I don't.
Yeah.
Even as you're saying that, it's a good reminder for me that it doesn't end. Yeah, because in my mind it's like, and it happens on the day and then you're done. But no,
Right.
it doesn't. It continually sheds. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's something that I also didn't understand much myself, honestly,
Yeah.
until I had this experience. And you know, you do think that it's something that's like, oh, you're pregnant, and then, oh, unfortunately, you're not pregnant anymore. But no, your body has been preparing for this pregnancy, building pregnancy tissue, you know, growing this embryo into this fetus, right? So there is physical matter in your body that has been, you know, has been building up into this pregnancy. So that needs to be gone from your body, essentially. So it is something that is quite a process, and it took time. I ended up having contractions, which I didn't know was a thing about that happens with some miscarriages. And this was happening on the airplane as we're going back, and it was all happening. And it was just, I mean, I have the whole story on the blog if anyone is interested in reading what happened from the beginning to the end.
I'll link to the story on the blog, because it's an essay well worth reading, because it for anybody at all, anybody, no matter what age, I think it's an essay that's well worth a read. So I'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, so essentially that had happened. And then, you know, coming back from that, then we were just sort of thinking about, you know, we took a New Year trip and everything, and just like went out, and like, it was like a part of the healing journey, I think. Just going out and like traveling again a little bit. And very fortunately, I'm very fortunate that I was able to get pregnant very soon after again. But then what came into question this time was, okay, what are we going to do? Like, we had this conversation in Taiwan when we thought, you know, like, we were having that first pregnancy, that, you know, like, what's the next step? Like, we're living in Japan at the moment. Do we stay in Japan? Do we go? Like, what, do we go back to Australia? You know, how are we going to, what is the next step? And that's ultimately, you know, it was, as you know, Sarah, there was so much back and forth, and it was a very emotional time for me.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because your heart, like, there's so many people I know who lived in Japan who just, like, that part of their heart still lives here.
Yes.
And they find it, like, some people mourn so badly that they got into depression. Some people mourn so badly they still talk about it now, or want to start something Japanese in their, you know, if they've gone back to Europe or America or something like that. It's a funny thing. It's a funny thing.
Yeah. And it's something that I found it's not necessarily unique to Japan, but I find it's something that happens very often with people who have been in Japan.
Yes.
There's something about it. I don't know what it is, but it just gets into every part of your body. And I feel the same. Like, I've left part of myself in Japan. Japan will always be a part of me. And so it was very, very, very difficult to make that decision about what to do next. But we honestly had been feeling, even before the baby, a little bit stagnant in what we were doing. We're like, okay, what are we going? There's something coming up here, you know. And what is the next stage going to be? So we knew that something new was going to be on the horizon, but the timing of it then became dictated by the pregnancy. Because if I was going to be leaving, then I need to be on the plane, you know, at a certain point before, you know, they won't allow me to travel anymore. And so then it kind of just, yeah, we made that decision to leave. And then it was basically this huge international move. Ended up back, you know, like we traveled back when I was 7 months pregnant, and then basically straight into trying to work out a life here again, you know, like sorting out where we were living, sorting out like going to the hospital and kind of getting back into that system, which is totally different to the Japanese
2019
system.
that was, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. And so this is like, yeah, basically from, you know, mid-July we got back, and ended up having the baby
from that time.
I know there was so much that was going on.
I'm having memories. It's like, oh, that's right, because as a coach I get to witness people's stories so clearly, but because I'm a coach as well, what I do is I just drag and drop whatever's happened and then move on to the next thing, and then drag and drop and then move on to the next thing. So being reminded of all this, it's like, oh yeah, that's right, that happened at that time. You're like,
yeah,
oh, I'm sure you remember, Sarah. I'm like, actually, I just need to just reach back there. So it's a good reminder, and it's a good reminder of how people's stories evolve and come on, and who knew that COVID-19 was going to happen as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something that we obviously didn't know was going to happen. So you know, we ended up having the baby in mid-October, a little bit past the due date. So we were like, yeah, anxiously waiting for that to happen. And thankfully she was born healthy and well. And but obviously it's a huge transition to go from someone being not a parent to a parent. And then of course, like just a couple of months into her life, COVID starts coming into the situation, into the, you know, into our world, and suddenly things are starting to shut down. You know, the world is slowing down. We're spending all of this time at home. And, you know, here in Victoria, in Australia, we have had some quite strict restrictions been going on, especially the last couple of months, where we've had quite a strict lockdown, which we are just coming out of now. So it's been a very strange time where we're, you know, both new parents and also navigating the business world in a different way, where, you know, like suddenly, you know, we've gone from traveling all the time, and not just traveling all the time, but also working in the travel industry
and getting money from that.
Yes. And having that being totally turned on its head almost overnight, you know, and then just being in this very strange space where it's just like, okay, we can't travel. There are many things we can't do. We can't even go to a store, you know, for example, like to buy stuff in order to, you know, make this new project a reality, or, you know, all of these things. So it's been a time of, you know, reflection. And I've also had to learn a lot to be just okay with being in a certain place and just letting things play out, and know that certain things are not in my control. Because in many other aspects of my life, I have been that sort of person where I'm like, okay, I can go out and get that thing. I need to do that, so I need to do A, B, C, D, or, you know, whatever. Whereas this was like, well, I can't do A, B, C, D right now. So what am I going to do? And so it's been a very, very strange time. And we are just coming out of it now. As of today, we can officially go anywhere in the state, which is huge. Not out of state yet, but it's huge. It means, you know, I can go back to my hometown and see my parents. I can go, you know, somewhere, you know, outside of the area that I'm living, and we can go places. And it just feels monumental, because it's not just that, you know, shops are opening back up again, and life feels like it's returning somewhat to a semi-normal state. And it's quite weird, because I don't know how to be social anymore in a way. Like even just going out to a store feels very, very strange. And so, you know, things have changed a lot. And now we're moving into, okay, what does post-COVID life look like? Or what is the next step in our lives?
And let's be very honest about this, Jess, as well. This has been very taxing on your business, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
let's make no mistake about that. And that's not the same for every business. Some businesses have thrived during this time, and other businesses. And so you've had to be very creative. But I also want to just honor this, like you did a country move. You moved from Japan back to there, 7 months pregnant. Then you had a baby at the same time as you're recovering from losing your first baby. And then lockdown comes, but you're also navigating. I just want to put this against the backdrop of you're also navigating being back around both your family of origin and your in-law family who live very close to you.
Yes.
So there's this, and also all the different kind of cultural melange of that. And what by that I mean all of yous are Aussies, but I mean like we touched on conspiracy theories earlier, but there's a bit of that there, but we'll just park that over here for now. But just that whole thing about the different ways that people navigate the COVID-19 situation, the
Yes.
different ways they choose to protect their children and so on. I'll leave it nice and loose. But so there's just this whole new set of things to navigate from being this kind of like this free couple with award-winning travel blogs enjoying this kind of free life to being in this like strange, I mean, still very privileged and still being able to eat every day and still being warm and dry and all that, you know, let's not forget that. As we have our like pity party, but I also want to honor all those things that came like bam 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 bam. It was a lot, and even though it's a really, really hard time for you business wise and you're having to innovate very deliberately and very creatively, it's a lot. I feel like you're coming out of it though. I feel like you're emerging at the moment somehow. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling very much this sense of possibility right now, and I don't know where that is going to lead, which, you know, can be anxiety inducing, but at the same time I'm choosing to focus on the excitement of that, because
process, I think.
Yes, like I've been feeling like something has been emerging for some time, but it, you know, there's been so much going on and there's been so much that I just haven't been able to see a clear path at this point. And I honestly now don't see the clear path yet. And who knows where it's going to go, where we're going to go from here. But it definitely does feel like there are possibilities. It definitely does feel like we're moving somewhat in the right direction. It certainly helps that we are coming out of lockdown here and we're getting that kind of momentum or that kind of feeling that things are changing, and that we are moving forward. So I'm definitely feeling that sense of, you know, something is going to come up, and just trying to stay the course and just listen to, try different things and listen to our intuition about, you know, how we're feeling about different things.
Good to know. So it's good timing that we're talking as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to kind of I want to just finish with this ancestral journey that you've been on. So do you mind if I mention the course that we went through together?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
So Jess and I did it's not really a course, it's a lifelong journey really, isn't it? I suppose it's a lifelong examination, and I don't know how you look at it, but this is what I think anyway. Well, a few months ago I was called in on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement, not movement, but on the back of Black Lives Matter and during COVID and just everything that this last government in America has revealed. No matter what your politics, I'm just going to put it like that. And then the Black Lives Matter thing, one of the people I would consider one of my mentors, Dr. Frantonia Pollins, had advertised a course called The Evil Behind Your Love and Light, which was aimed at people like me who are kind of coaches who have a spiritual element. Actually, it was probably aimed, I don't know if you think this, Jess, because I don't think that I fully fulfilled that remit. I kind of visit there, but it's not the full thrust of my you're a client, so would you say that? I think
yes, I definitely feel that. Yeah, it was a different, I think the core clientele of that course was quite different to anything well, it's quite different to what you do, and it's definitely very different to what I do.
However, very,
yeah.
very relevant, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's, I would invite anybody to go and see it. And it is, I think I could go either, I could veer into that area if I'm not vigilant. But it was kind of challenging that love and light only, positive vibes only, and so on, which it results that is very, very damaging to especially women of color and especially Black women,
Yes.
the diaspora. So it was very eye-opening on 6 billion different levels. And now you'll understand, when we were talking about some elements of colonialism earlier, that this kind of comes back to this. That's interesting. We went through that together, and we can continue to have conversations about it, so we keep it in the front of our minds, and we keep not centering our own experience, and keep trying to listen to that voice. But one of the things that we were called in to do, and I think you and I are both trying to do the work by the book in some kind of ways, because if we keep trying to question it, we keep recentering ourselves and not understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've both been doing is to visit into our ancestry and dig into our ancestry, and it's actually pulled out an enormous amount of, and this is what we've been called in to do. It's like, don't try and heal racism because you have lines going back in your ancestry which need to be healed too. This is the kind of thrust of it. And so we've been going back. And so first of all, you have to go back. And this is what's been very revealing in both lines for you. For me, I've got a wee altar up there that I go and visit every day with pictures of my grandparents. And interesting, my mum texted the other day and said, oh, it's the anniversary of her mum's death. Last week, which was 23 years ago. She lived a full and interesting life. She was 86 when she passed away. So I don't ever feel kind of too sad about that. I just feel very loving towards her and that. But I felt sad for my mum on that day, because she was obviously thinking about it, and she's in lockdown. They've just got into lockdown again. So it was just that kind of perfect storm of stuff, but not in a morbid way, but in a really lovely way. And lovely way, but also in a very reflective way of like, oh, I carry a lot of ancestral damage and harm that's not only directly on my family, but whatever they participated in the past. So, and this goes for anybody. So so that's, and especially for somebody like me who's got a little bit of an activist streak in them. And I think you also have that kind of sense of justice and so on, or wanting to help kind of in you, pulling away from that and putting it back inside yourself, while at the same time being active in the world, has been a real learning for me. And I've absolutely, and I wouldn't say I've loved it, but it's probably one of the biggest learnings. It's easy to do a course, write the things down, cite the references, cite the science, put up a blog post about, that's easy, but this is not. It is easy in a way, because you're still just at home, safe, doing it, but it's like, oh, you constantly have to keep bringing yourself back to the work. I don't know. I'm only talking for myself now, Jess, and I don't think I've ever articulated this before.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's what really came through for me, as you said, like, certainly in my case, I wasn't working in that area at all, but this course was highly relevant to anybody. And it just made me understand that a lot of the work we tend to do is external, and that we don't often visit the internal as much as we need to, and reflect upon ourselves. And I realized that actually, through that, I don't know a lot about my ancestry. I know a little bit of here or there. But, it's something that I've been starting to feel a little bit interested even before the course. And this is something that's interesting that has been happening, is like, since we got back and, we went through the house, like the childhood house that, I grew up in. And basically during that time, we've been finding little bits of his past, of his history that he didn't know.
can I just give the backdrop to this in a nutshell is, if there's anything uncomfortable, I'll edit this out for this, is because Hai's family all escaped Vietnam, or what, is that what you'd say? Like kind of, they were refugees, is that correct?
Yes.
And they did that in bits and pieces, and not everybody made it. But there's huge gaps in the family history, including documentation, including the stories that would have traveled with people. And those gaps, some of them are scientific, they're just very practical, like the paperwork got lost on the way, or these things that actually all refugees have to face. It's this kind of massive gaps in their kind of personal documented history and so on. But then there's also the gaps that are left by the trauma of having to do that, and people not wanting to tell the stories until they're ready. And I think that, would that be fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah. Or not asking those questions.
Yeah, and you have to be incredibly mindful of that because you're a curious party. And I think that the most beautiful example of that was you were talking about when you visited Hai's childhood village, and you were like, wow, you know, and I suppose for him as well, you start to see the faces of people who could be related to you. You're super curious, or I would be super curious, like, let's get stuck in and ask some questions. But like, maybe the other person's a bit like, do you know what? I'm good. Let's get back on the scooter and go somewhere else. And so meaning that those gaps exist not only because of documentation or historic or storytelling, but also just because people need to be ready to get back into that and face that kind of stuff. And this relates very closely to the stuff we've been doing. And you know, yeah, all families have these secrets. I mean, my grandma herself like started to tell us the truth when she was on her literally on her deathbed, you know, like the years 1 or 2 years before she started telling us about her mother, who we'd been told died of cancer when she was 2, but no, she hadn't. She just left her and gone off. You know. And so it's like, oh, so we have a great grandma floating around somewhere in the ether, you know. It's like, and then you have to kind of rejig these stories. That's just the background that I want to give to this, because it's so different to any approach I've ever made before on this kind of thing. So why don't you tell us a bit more about this? So what you've learned about your family, which is enormous, right? You've got this enormous family, and then what's coming through on the high side, because with the birth of your daughter, of course, suddenly the family starts getting more interest. The Vietnamese side of the family starts getting more interested as well, or you're more interested because you want Micah to know more about her past, and then that kind of sweeps people along with you. I don't know exactly how this has worked out, Jess, but why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, sure. So definitely the birth of our daughter sort of made us very curious about, well, we're starting to think a lot about what we want to, you know, pass down to her.
Got High on board.
Yeah, so that's sort of the thing that kind of like clicked for him. And he was just like, well, I want her to know her Vietnamese side, right? But I don't really have the information to tell her. Now he's sort of feeling ready to take that step to find out more for himself. And, you know, finding a few, you know, bits of paperwork here and there, and finding like a few little bits of the puzzle has really like sparked, I guess, this flame to wanting to know more. And so, you know, obviously, you know, high side, it's very clear that there's a lot of gaps, right? There's, you know, things that we don't know, things that haven't been asked, things that we can find out, but yet hadn't been in that position yet, or feeling ready to take that next step. But there's a lot for us to learn on that side. But then I also, going through this course and then like reflecting on myself a lot more, I thought, you know, while I do know a little bit more about where I come from, I also have a lot of gaps. There's also a lot of things I don't know. And so I started getting curious about it, and then jumping into this course where, you know, a lot of the, you know, the presenters and the teachers were saying, you have to know where you came from. You need to know you have ancestors too, right? There's sort of this kind of thing where we think that ancestors are only for people for people of color, or from tribes, or from, you know, some, so we have the indigenous people, but, you know, everyone has ancestors, everyone has some, you know, story, some lineage. So it's it really made me think, I actually need to dive into this. And so that's something that I've been doing myself, particularly over the past couple of weeks, been diving into my ancestry. And fortunately, I do have some things to go on, because I do have some members of the family who have been curious about some things in the past and have put together some elements of the family tree and things. So I've been able to trace it back to my 10th great grandfather, which is insane.
Where's that?
And
And in Europe
so,
somewhere?
yes, actually in Germany. So I always was told, like, as I was growing up, oh, like we're Dutch, we're Dutch. And because, you know, my parents, my both from my mother's side and my father's side have Dutch ancestry. So I know that my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, both came out from Holland. My paternal grandparents both did as well. And my father was actually born in Amsterdam, and the whole family came over by boat. And so, like, I've always thought, oh, like we're Dutch. But it wasn't until, and actually I did know this a little bit before, but I hadn't really thought much about it. I did discover that my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, actually was German. And I was like, okay, so like there's some German ancestry there as well. But it turns out that even my grandfather has, if we trace it back far enough, it ends up in Germany as well. So it's been very interesting to discover these things. And you know, I'm digging in, and I'm just finding so many different connections. Like yesterday, for example, I found out that a first cousin twice removed was executed in a Japanese camp in Indonesia. And here we have Japan and Indonesia just coming together again, just out of the blue, right? And just there's, and you know, how did they come to be there? And you know, the whole there's just so many questions I have now about that little branch of the family tree. So there's just so many things that are coming up, and I can't say how interesting and how rewarding it has been, and how it's something that I didn't know that I was missing until I started going deeper and understanding that, okay, like I'm part of something bigger here. And it's also gave me a greater sense of what I'm doing in this life too. You know, like you're always talking, Sarah, about like the 7 generations either side. And I do feel like, while I've always felt like it's important to do good work in this life, you know, to leave, you know, this planet in as good a shape as we can, for example, I did feel like, okay, this greater sense of the impact of what I'm doing on future generations, you know, and seeing like what's come before, and then, oh, okay, I'm in that position right now. Like I'm in that position to then create some kind of legacy, or, you know, I'm in a position to either, you know, cause more harm or do more healing. Right. So it's something that has really made me think like, wow, there's so much I can do, regardless of what I'm doing outwardly in my life, regardless of my job or anything. It's something that I am now feeling this great sense of, you know, that I can do something that's going to live on in a different way. Maybe not in the way that people traditionally think when they think of a legacy, in terms of, you know, like how well you do in
how
the
many
corporate
books
world or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there a statue for you? Did you name a library? Yeah. Okay.
So it's going into that area now.
Yeah. Love it. And I've just got the tagline for your for this conversation, which is cause more harm or do more healing.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Because that, I mean, you know, that's what it comes down to, I think, in total, actually, of both our work. Is how can we do that? And this ancestral stuff, it's just so interesting, isn't it? And I think this is a nice kind of place to wrap up. I mean, I would love to talk more with you specifically about some areas. One about, you know, that beautiful essay you wrote about losing your first baby, and then this, and also about, you were very frank about your birth story with your daughter as well, your second baby. And but also this ancestral stuff. I mean, I could talk about this all day now. It's been, and I want to be very clear, I'm doing this not out of curiosity, actually. I'm doing this because I've been called in to do less harm and do more healing. That's why I'm doing it. That's at the center of it. And the curiosity, I guess, is just a nice little side order in a way.
Yes.
the other thing I was just thinking as you were talking there about like, oh, Germany and Holland is also, one has to understand the history of that part of the world as well, to understand that whole thing as well, because that's been quite fluid. I mean, I don't even know, I'm from Europe, I'm from the UK, but like, I don't really, I'm just thinking there was Prussia, there was, you know, there was, when Russia went in and took some of those and was, you know, caretaking some of those countries earlier on in this last century, when, you know, there's Napoleon, there's like there's that whole area itself has been fluid, and all land masses are continually doing that. So it's a history lesson in itself, and maybe though that you know, sacred circle of Black, Indigenous and women of color who called us into this work knew that when we were being told to look into our ancestry, that if we're truly smart and the penny truly drops, that we also need to understand the history of that land, and that we need to understand it not only from the points of view of the people who we've been told to read it from as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's like pass the parcel, isn't it? You just keep opening it up and opening it up and opening it up, but it's amazing work. So Jess, do you have any closing words or any words of wisdom for the listeners? Which is an awful question, isn't it? But do you have any closing words or anything that you feel like you haven't said? We've been on for so long. Thank you for your generosity.
No problem at all.
This one.
Sorry to have gone on so much, but it's, you know, really, I mean, I would just say, just do the things that you are interested in doing, like follow that inner voice. If something seems interesting to you, see where it leads. You know, like a lot of people said to me, like when we moved to Japan, oh, it was so brave of you to go there, and you know, you didn't have a job or anything, and you just like, or you just went to a completely different place. But for me, I don't feel like that at all. I felt that there was no risk at all. If I go to a place and if I keep a little bit of money for a plane ticket back home, I can always go back. I can always change course. I can always course correct. I can always do something else. But the what if, the what if I didn't take that step, right? And that's the same thing I'm feeling with the ancestry as well. What if, you know, what if something is actually different than what we think it is? And just putting yourself out there to just follow those little breadcrumbs to see where it goes. And if it doesn't go anywhere, that's okay. But who knows what kind of life it could open up for you? Who knows what kind of information or healing that it brings you? So just, I guess, believe in magic and listen for it. And
what we say in our group, make it huge, let it be huge.
Yeah, let it be huge. Yeah, let it be huge. You know, let those little things be sustenance and to carry you forward into finding more about yourself and who you are, and just explore those different paths, and don't necessarily worry about what society has told you that you should be going down this path, because I've certainly bucked that trend many times, and it's
so very much
just do you just keep going and exploring those little voices inside that tell you to look into something a bit deeper, and you never know what you'll find.
Gorgeous. Thanks, Jess. That's absolutely brilliant. Where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. So the easiest place is probably just to come over to notesofnomads.com. There you can find
nomads, all one word.
All one word.com. There you can find like all of our social handles. You can send me a message, and you can find all of the relevant information there.
Mm-hmm. And that's notesofnomads.com. Brilliant.
Correct.
So, so much, Jess. It's been an absolute treat talking to you. I feel like I've been on a round the world trip myself just now. Like, you just I learned so much about people I know just by asking these questions, and they often report back also that it's been quite an interesting experience for them to talk about themselves. And that's one of the reasons why I do these, is because because I get to witness people's stories every single day. And as I say, you can go onto any big name podcast and you'll see the same group of people cycling around, but there's so many different ways to lead a life, so many. And I want to report them. I want people to see how the twists and turns and the downs and the, you know, the times when people are just like desperate on the phone with me, or, you know, crying in my office, or, but also the joy that we have of, like, when you told me you were pregnant, or all these different stuff the second time, is like all these stories, and all the what Steve Jobs, and again, Steve Jobs is the person we quote so often, like joining the dots backwards, is, I hope it gives people heart. I hope it helps people to take heart and to understand that there's not one linear uniform way to do things, and that we can recover from great disasters and traumas, and get on paths and follow things that are going to have some influence 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. And the simplest way to say about that is, when you look into your ancestry, is, you know, for me, certainly my parents get let off the hook for a lot of things, because they just become part of a whole line that comes down and actually ends in me, because I chose not to have children. But it doesn't really end in me, because my DNA goes on, and it's not just about DNA either, to be fair. It's about the legacy that leads, that comes off from you too. So this is such an honor and privilege to do this series, and to tell these legends, and to share these legends with the people who listen. Just love it. And so then we can start to create and design lifestyles and work styles that we can be proud of, but knowing that they can always twist, turn, change. And as Jess said, following your interests. Sometimes people are like, find your passion. It's like, really? How often do we feel that kind of flush of passion? Follow things that are interesting you follow those little seeds that start to kind of push out the dirt, and start to show interest. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon. Do share this this podcast if you found it interesting, and pop over to Sarah for your coaching. Okay, bye.
Bye.